Senator Sanders, you don't think cash payments are the best way to address this issue. But according to a new Gallup poll, 73% of African Americans are in favor of cash payments to black Americans who are descendants of slaves. How do you respond to them?
Well, I respond to that by saying that I am supportive of Jim Clyburn's legislation, which is called 10-20-30. And what that understands is that as a result of slavery and segregation and the institutional racism we see now in healthcare, in education, in financial services, we are going to have to focus big time on rebuilding distressed communities in America, including African American communities. In terms of education, I also have a plan. It's called the Thurgood Marshall Plan, and it would focus on ending the growth of segregated schools in America. It would triple funding for Title I schools. It would make sure that teachers in this country earned at least $60,000 a year.
Senator Sanders, thank you very much. Congressman Ryan, President Trump's tariffs have boosted the U.S. steel industry, but hurt auto manufacturers like those here in Michigan, which could drive up the cost of cars. As president, would you continue President Trump's steel tariffs?
Look, I think President Trump was onto something when he talked about China. China has been abusing the economic system for a long time. They steal intellectual property. They subsidize goods coming into this country. They've displaced steel workers, auto workers across the board, eroded our manufacturing, and we basically transferred our wealth of our middle class either up to the top 1% or to China for them to build their military. So I think we need some targeted response against China. But you know how you beat China? You outcompete them. And that's why I put a chief manufacturing officer in place to make sure that we rebuild the manufacturing base. We've got to fill these factories that in Detroit, in Youngstown, that used to make cars and steel. We've got to fill them with workers who are making electric vehicles, batteries, charging stations, make sure they're making solar panels. As I said earlier, China dominates 60% of the solar panel market. They dominate 50 to 60% of the electric vehicle market. We're going to make 10 million electric vehicles somewhere in the world in the next 10 years. I want them made in the United States. That's why I have a chief manufacturing officer that will sit in the White House and help drive this agenda.
Thank you. Just as a point of clarification, as president, would you continue President Trump's steel tariffs, yes or no?
Well, I would have to reevaluate. I think some of them are effective, but he's bungled the whole thing, obviously. See, here's the problem with President Trump. He has a tactical move, one of many. He has a tactical move. What's the grand strategy for the United States? China has a 100-year plan, a 50-year plan, a 30-year plan, a 20-year plan. We live in a 24-hour news cycle. That spells disaster for our economy and disaster for our global politics.
Thank you, Congressman. Congressman Delaney, your response.
So listen, this is what I don't understand. President Trump wants to build physical walls and beats up on immigrants. Most of the folks running for president want to build economic walls to free trade and beat up on President Obama. I'm the only one running for president who actually supports the Trans-Pacific Partnership. President Obama was right about that. We should be getting back in that. Senator Warren just issued a trade plan that would prevent the United States from trading with its allies. We can't isolate ourselves from the world. We have to engage with fair, rules-based
trade. Thank you, Congressman
trade.
Delaney. Senator Warren, please respond.
You know, for decades, we have had a trade policy that has been written by giant multinational corporations to help giant multinational corporations. They have no loyalty to America. They have no patriotism. If they can save a nickel by moving a job to Mexico, they'll do it in a heartbeat. If they can continue a polluting plant by moving it to Vietnam, they'll do it in a heartbeat. I have put out a new comprehensive plan that says we're not going to do it that way. We're going to negotiate our deals with unions at the table, with small businesses at the table, with small farmers at the table, with environmentalists at the table, with human rights activists at the table. And then we're going to use the fact that everybody in the world wants to get to America's markets. They want to sell to you.
Congressman Delaney.
Sorry.
Everyone wants to get to America's markets.
Senator.
No. So the question is,
Senator, thank you. Please abide by the rules. Congressman Delaney, it's your turn. Thank you, Senator. Congressman Delaney.
So that was the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I think President Obama was right. He did include environmental standards. He did include labor standards. We would be in an entirely different position with China if we had entered the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We can't isolate ourselves from the world. We can't isolate ourselves from Asia. Senator Warren's plan basically that she put out, we would not be able to trade with the United Kingdom. We would not be able to trade with the EU. It is so extreme that it'll isolate the American economy from the rest of the world.
Senator?
Notice what
Senator Warren.
Senator Warren. Notice what I think he said.
Senator Sanders, please let Senator Warren respond.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What the congressman is describing as extreme is having deals that are negotiated by American workers for American workers. American workers want those jobs, and we can build the trade deals that do it. People want access to our markets all around the world. Then the answer is, let's make them raise their standards, make them pay their workers more, let their workers unionize, raise their environmental standards before they come to us and say they want to be able to sell their products. Right now, the whole game is working for the big multinationals. It's just not working for the people here in the United States,
Senator,
and we can
thank you very much.
change that.
Congressman O'Rourke, your response.
You know, the question was about tariffs, and they're a huge mistake. They constitute the largest tax increase on the American consumer, hitting the middle class and the working poor especially hard. And farmers in Iowa and across the country are bearing the brunt of the consequences. When have we ever gone to war, including a trade war, without allies and friends and partners? As president, we will hold China accountable, but we will bring our allies and friends like the European Union to bear, and we'll also negotiate trade deals that favor farmers and American workers and protect human rights and the environment and labor, not just here in the United States, but in those
Thank you very much.
countries.
Senator Sanders, please respond to Congressman O'Rourke.
Yeah, okay. You're looking, I believe, at the only member of Congress who not only voted against these disastrous trade agreements, NAFTA, PNTR with China, which cost us over 4 million jobs, but also helped lead the effort against these agreements. Now, Elizabeth is absolutely right. If anybody here thinks that corporate America gives one damn about the average American worker, you're mistaken. If they can save 5 cents by going to China, Mexico, or Vietnam, or any place else, that's exactly what they would do. As president, let me tell you what I will do. These guys line up at the federal trough. They want military contracts. They want all kinds of contracts. Well, under my administration, you ain't going to get those contracts if you throw American workers out on the street.
Thank you very much. Governor Hickenlooper, your response.
So I think, again, I think Congressman Delaney has got a point here, and there is a way of looking at trade that is therapeutic. The bottom line is, you talk to any economist, there is not a single example in history where a trade war had a winner. Trade wars are for losers. And the bottom line is, we've got to recognize, let's negotiate a better trade deal, but you're not going to win against China in a trade war when they've got 25% of our total debt. And step back and look at, here's Trump gives that giant tax cut, and at the same time, so we're paying in tariffs about $800 to $1,200 per household. And then we give this incredible tax cut to the rich. Essentially, what's happening is now he's transferred that tax obligation onto the middle class. That's what's outrageous, but tariffs are not the solution.
Governor, thank you. Senator Warren.
Anyone who thinks that these trade deals are mostly about tariffs just doesn't understand what's going on. Look at the new NAFTA 2.0. What's the central feature? It's to help pharmaceutical companies get longer periods of exclusivity, so they can charge Canadians, Americans, and Mexicans more money and make more profits. That's what trade deals have become. They have become a way for giant multinationals to change the regulatory environment so they can suck more profits out for themselves and to leave the American people behind. We have to have the courage to fight back against that corruption.
Senator, thank you. Governor Bullock, your response?
You know, Farmer in Rippey said to me, every time that Trump tweets, we lose hundreds of thousands of dollars. If Montana had to eat all the wheat that we produce, every Montanan would have to eat 40 loaves of bread a day. But by the same token, what we have is, I actually agree with Senator Warren on this in part. Corporations can move capital easy. Workers can't move. So going forward, we need to make sure that our trade deals actually are protecting, thinking about the workers. They can't be the stepchild, but the way to do it with this blunt instrument of tariffs that the president's doing, that's not how we get a fair deal for farmers anywhere or the manufacturers here in Detroit.
Governor, thank you very much. Mayor,
Don,
stand by, please. Stand by, please. Please abide by the rules. Mayor Buttigieg, on Thursday of this week, a GM plant in Michigan will stop production, the latest auto plant to cease operations in the industrial Midwest. This comes as part of the company's modernization plans, which will eventually result in 6,000 hourly workers losing their jobs or being reassigned to other plants. What is your plan for retraining workers whose jobs are at risk?
This happened in my community 20 years before I was born, and when I was growing up, we were still picking up the pieces. Empty factories, empty houses, poverty. I know exactly what happens to a community when these closures take place, and there will be more. It's why we actually need to put the interests of workers first. Of course we need to do retraining. We're doing it now in South Bend. We should continue to do it, but this is so much bigger than a trade fight. This is about a moment when the economy is changing before our eyes. There are people in the gig economy who go through more jobs in a week than my parents went through in their lifetime. It's why I've proposed that we allow gig workers to unionize, because a gig is a job and a worker is a worker.
Thank you, Mayor.
We have to respond to all of these changes and, in addition to confronting tech, in addition to supporting workers by doubling unionization as I propose to do, some of this is low tech too, like the minimum wage is just too low. And so-called conservative Christian senators right now in the Senate are blocking a bill to raise the minimum wage when Scripture says that whoever oppresses the poor taunts their maker.
Mayor, thank you very much. Congressman Delaney, I'm coming to you now. Your estimated net worth is more than $65 million. That would make you subject to Senator Warren's proposed wealth tax on the assets of the richest 75,000 households or so in the United States. Do you think Senator Warren's wealth tax is a fair way to fund childcare and education?
I think wealthy Americans have to pay more. Listen, I grew up in a blue-collar family. First in my family to go to college, became a successful entrepreneur, created thousands of jobs, supported thousands of entrepreneurs all around this country. And I've done well financially. I think I should pay more in tax. I think wealthy Americans should pay more in tax. But we have to have a real solution. The real solution is to raise the capital gains rates. There is no reason why people who invest for a living should pay less than people who work for a living. That's ridiculous. It's the biggest loophole in our tax code. We act like wealthy individuals are endangered species. And if we raise their taxes, they won't invest. That's crazy. That's how we get more revenues from wealthy individuals. We roll back the Trump tax cuts to wealthy individuals. I think the wealth tax will be fought in court forever. It's arguably unconstitutional, and the countries that have had it have largely abandoned it because it's impossible to implement. But here again, real solutions, not impossible promises.
Thank you.
Raise the capital gains tax, roll back the taxes on wealthy Americans.
Thank you,
That we can do in our first few months
Warren,
as president.
please respond.
So I have proposed a wealth tax. It's now time to do that. It's time to tax the top 0.1% of fortunes in this country. Your first $50 million you can keep free and clear, but your 50 millionth and first dollar, you got to pitch in 2 cents. 2 cents. What can America do with 2 cents? We can provide universal child care for every baby in this country aged 0 to 5. We can provide universal pre-K for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old. We can raise the wages of every child care worker and preschool teacher in this country. We can provide universal tuition-free college. We can expand Pell. We can put $50 billion into our historically black colleges and universities, and we can cancel student loan debt for 95% of the people who have it and start to close the wealth gap in America. It tells you how badly broken this economy is.
Senator, thank you very much.
2 cents
Delaney,
from
please.
the wealthiest in this country would let us invest in the rest of America.
Congressman, please
This
respond.
is not about whether wealthy Americans should pay more. I think we're all in agreement on that. It's a question of, do you have a real solution to make it happen? We can raise the capital gains rate to match the ordinary income. You know, the last president to do that was actually Ronald Reagan. We can do that in our first year. I've called for that to be done, and it'll double the earned income tax credit. I've called for the expansion of universal pre-K so that every American has pre-K, and I do it through an additional tax on high net worth individuals. But we don't need to come up with new taxes that are arguably unconstitutional.
Thank you, Congressman Delaney.
Will be fought in court for years.
I want to turn to the issue of student debt. I'm going to turn to the issue of student debt now, Mayor Buttigieg. You've talked about how you and your husband are paying down 6 figures of student loan debt. Under Senator Sanders' proposal to cancel all student loan debt, yours would immediately be wiped away. Why wouldn't you support that?
That'd be great for us. And then the next day, there would be a student loan program, and people would be out taking student loans wondering why they weren't lucky enough in timing to get theirs wiped away completely too. We can have debt-free college for low and middle-income students by expanding Pell Grants and compelling states to pick up more of the burden. And on the back end, for those of us who do have a lot of debt, we can make it more affordable, and we can expand a public service loan forgiveness program, which is an excellent program that is almost impossible to actually get access to right now. We can take these steps and have an approach that is actually fair. If we want to start wiping away student debt, here's where I would start. I would start with the for-profit colleges that took advantage of people, especially veterans, by the way. The moment I redeployed, my Facebook ad feed started filling with ads from these for-profit colleges. Under President Obama, they were held accountable for whether they delivered results. President Trump, under a Secretary of Education, who regrettably is from this state, did away with those rules. There's no accountability. On my watch, those colleges that turned the Department of Education into a predatory lender, that's where we would begin when it came to getting rid of loans.
Thank you, Mayor Buttigieg. Senator Sanders, you want to forgive all student loan debt? Your response?
Matter of fact, I do. But before I get into that, the major issue that we don't talk about in Congress, you don't talk about in the media, is the massive level of income and wealth inequality in America. You got 3 people who own more wealth than the bottom 90%. You got top 1% that owns more wealth than the bottom 92%. 49% of all new income goes to the top 1%. Companies like Amazon and billionaires out there do not pay 1 nickel in federal income tax. And we've got 500,000 people sleeping out on the street. What we need is a political revolution that tells these billionaires and corporate America that they are Americans, they'll participate in our society, but they have got to start paying their fair share of taxes, period.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. Ms. Williamson,
I'd like to respond.
you are proposing to make college free for all qualified students. Should the government pay for children from wealthier families to go to college?
I think that all domestic and international policy should be based on the idea that anything we do to help people thrive is a stimulation to our economy. That's how you stimulate your economy. So if a few people take advantage, but there are 4 or 5 people who are going to take the money that they then have in the bank. When you look at this $1.5 trillion college debt, this is why I agree with Bernie, or I would be, okay, why don't we swap it? We had a $2 trillion tax cut where 83 cents of every dollar goes to the very, very richest among us. That does not stimulate the economy. If we get rid of this college debt, think of all the young people who will have the discretionary spending. They'll be able to start their business. The best thing you could do to stimulate the U.S. economy is to get rid of this debt. This is not just about a plan to do it, it's about a philosophy of governing. And I've heard some people here tonight, I almost wonder why you're Democrats. You seem to think there's something wrong about using the instruments of government to help people. That is what government should do. All policy should help people thrive. That is how we will have peace, and that is how we will have prosperity.
Thank you, Ms. Williamson. Congressman O'Rourke, you don't support free 4-year college. Your response to Ms. Williamson?
I support free 2-year college. Earn that associate's degree, realize your full potential. Debt-free 4-year college. But unlike some of the other candidates on the stage, that's not just for tuition. That is room and books and board, the full cost of being able to better yourself so that you can better this country. And then for that school teacher who in many places like Texas is working a 2nd or a 3rd job, full forgiveness for her outstanding student loan debt, forgiveness for that person willing to work at the VA and serve our former service members. And we do not do that at the expense of unions. We elevate them as well and make it easier to join an apprenticeship to learn a skill or a trade that you can command for the rest of your life.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman. Senator Klobuchar, your response.
I want to make it easier for kids to go to college. And I think we do it by focusing our resources on the people that need it most. And my problem with some of these plans is they literally would pay for wealthy kids, for Wall Street kids to go to college. There's no difference. It says everyone is free. I don't think that makes sense. And I'm very concerned if we do things like that, the debt we're going to pass on to the next generation and the next generation. So what I would do about student loan debt is that I would allow people to refinance it at a better rate, and I would make sure that we improve those student loan repayment programs for our teachers and expand them so that you literally over 5-10 years can get it paid for if you go into occupations where we don't have enough workers. I think we need to mesh what we were just talking about with the economy with our education policy.
Thank you, Senator. I want to turn to foreign policy now. Senator Sanders, President Trump has argued that the United States cannot continue to be the, quote, policeman of the world. You said the exact same thing on a debate stage in 2016. If voters are hearing the same message from you and President Trump on the issue of military intervention, how should they expect that you will be any different from him?
Trump is a pathological liar. I tell the truth. We have been in Afghanistan, I think, 18 years, in Iraq, 16 or 17 years. We have spent $5 trillion on the war on terror, and there are probably more terrorists out there now than before it began. We're going to spend, the Congress passed, and I will not vote for, a $715 billion military budget, more than the 10 next countries combined. What we need is a foreign policy that focuses on diplomacy, ending conflicts by people sitting at a table, not by killing each other. As President of the United States, I will go to the United Nations and not denigrate it, not attack the UN, but bring countries together in the Middle East and all over the world to come to terms with their differences and solve those problems peacefully. The United States cannot be the policeman of the world.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Hickenlooper, how do you respond to Senator Sanders' vision for America's role in the world?
Well, we share the recognition of the incredible cost. People don't realize that half the soldiers that fought in Iraq and Afghanistan were National Guard. And so I went and sent them off on their deployments, big, noisy hangars, but I also mourned with their families when they didn't come back. We are able now to, I call it constant engagement, but we should have an international diplomatic approach where we're talking to everybody. Because if we're going to deal with climate change and cybersecurity and nuclear proliferation, we got to be talking to everybody. And tariff wars don't work. They're for losers.
Thank you, Governor. I want to go to Congressman Ryan, and I want to turn to the subject of North Korea, which just hours ago launched 2 short-range ballistic missiles for the second time in less than a week. Congressman, you said that you would not meet with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un unless you were at least close to a deal. Now, Senator Klobuchar says that she would, quote, always be willing to meet with leaders to discuss policies. Is that view wrong?
Yeah, I think so. I love Amy Klobuchar, but I think she's wrong on this one. I don't think presidents of the United States meet with dictators. We saw what just happened with President Trump. He goes to the demilitarized zone with the leader of North Korea, gives him a huge photo op, gives him global credibility because the most powerful person in the world is sitting there meeting with him, and weeks later he's lobbing more missiles. That doesn't make any sense. We've got to demilitarize our foreign policy. We've got to make sure that we are engaging these countries all the time. This is very difficult work. I've been in Congress 17 years. I've sat on the Defense Appropriations Committee. I sat on the Armed Services Committee. This is long, tedious work, much of it done outside of the eye of the TV camera. And as president, you've got to monitor that and be very disciplined every day. Don't go give a dictator a huge win. Sit down and do your job. And the same thing with what's happening in Central America. He's cutting the State Department budget. Nicaragua, Guatemala, El Salvador, where the migrants are coming from, go fix the problem at its source and use diplomacy to do it.
Senator Klobuchar, your response?
I think we agree. I just think you have to leave open the possibility of meeting with anyone at any place. What I don't like is how this president has handled it. You've heard of the Truman Doctrine, the Monroe Doctrine. He's done the go it alone doctrine with the rest of the world. He's taken us out of the climate change agreement, out of the Iran nuclear agreement, out of the Russian nuclear agreement, and I don't agree with that. And when he was just with Vladimir Putin at the G20, when he was asked about invading our democracy, he made a joke. Hundreds of thousands of Americans have lost their lives on the battlefield to protect our democracy and our right to vote. Four little girls in Birmingham, Alabama, lost their life in a church at the height of the Civil Rights Amendment. So I do believe you meet with people, but you better have an agenda, and you better put our interests of our country first, not the Russians.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. Mayor Buttigieg, you served in Afghanistan, where just yesterday 2 U.S. service members were killed. There are currently about 14,000 U.S. service members in Afghanistan. You've said, quote, one thing everybody can agree on is that we're getting out of Afghanistan. Will you withdraw all U.S. service members by the end of your first year in office?
We will withdraw. We have to.
In your first year?
Yes. Look, around the world, we will do whatever it takes to keep America safe. But I thought I was one of the last troops leaving Afghanistan when I thought I was turning out the lights years ago. Every time I see news about somebody being killed in Afghanistan, I think about what it was like to hear an explosion over there and wonder whether it was somebody that I served with, somebody that I knew, a friend, roommate, colleague. We're pretty close to the day when we will wake up to the news of a casualty in Afghanistan who was not born on 9/11. I was sent into that war by a congressional authorization as well as a president. And we need to talk not only about the need for a president committed to ending endless war, but the fact that Congress has been asleep at the switch. And on my watch, I will propose that any authorization for the use of military force have a 3-year sunset and have to be renewed. Because if men and women in the military have the courage to go serve, members of Congress ought to have to summon the courage to vote on whether they ought to be there.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to bring in Congressman O'Rourke. Congressman O'Rourke, returning to the question of whether you would withdraw all U.S. service members from Afghanistan during your first year in office as president. How do you respond, sir?
I would, in my first term in office, agree that there is nothing about perpetuating this war already in its 18th year that will make it any better. We've satisfied the reasons for our involvement in Afghanistan in the first place. And it's time to bring those service members back home from Afghanistan, but also from Iraq, also from Yemen and Somalia and Libya and Syria. There is no reason for us to be at war all over the world tonight. As president, I will end those wars, and we will not start new wars. We will not send more U.S. service members overseas to sacrifice their lives and to take the lives of others in our name. We can resolve these challenges peacefully and diplomatically.
Congressman. Governor Hickenlooper, you disagree. You've said that you're open to keeping some service members in Afghanistan beyond your first term.
I look at it as a humanitarian issue, and with all due respect, you're looking at the condition of women. If we completely pull our troops out of there, you're going to see a humanitarian disaster that will startle and frighten every man, woman, and child in this country. And I don't think, we have troops in over 400 different locations around the world. Most of them are small, they're peacekeeping, they're not greatly at risk. We're going to have to be in Afghanistan. Look at the progress that's happened in that country. We're going to turn our backs and walk away from people that have risked their lives to help us and build a different future for Afghanistan and that part of the world?
Thank you, Governor. Senator Warren, you want to make it U.S. policy that the U.S. will never use a nuclear weapon unless another country uses one first. Now, President Obama reportedly considered that policy, but ultimately decided against it. Why should the U.S. tie its own hands with that policy?
Because it makes the world safer. The United States is not going to use nuclear weapons preemptively, and we need to say so to the entire world. It reduces the likelihood that someone miscalculates, someone misunderstands. Our first responsibility is to keep ourselves safe. And what's happening right now with Donald Trump, as they keep expanding the different ways that we have nuclear weapons, the different ways that they could be used, puts us all at risk. We talk about what's happening around the world. I have 3 older brothers who served in the military. I see that they would do anything. Our military is the best on earth, but we should not be asking our military to take on jobs that do not have a military solution. We need to use our diplomatic tools, our economic tools, and if we're going to send someone into war, we better have a plan for how we're going to get them out on the other end.
Thank you, Senator.